The Brexit-related immigration laws are affecting many sectors now and in the future. But one that should be close to our economic hearts is construction. It's a £500 billion annual spend, with around 1 in 4 businesses in the UK in that sector. With big infrastructure projects commissioned by the government to help boost the economy, where is the sector going to get its workers from? Now, traditionally, a big percentage of them have been foreign workers, sort of the reverse of Auf Wiedersehen Pet, for those who can remember that far back. To find out more, for our many construction sectors viewers and listeners, I revisited our favourite immigration lawyer from Latitude Law, Shara Pledger. Welcome again, Shara.
Hi there.
Right, the construction sector is important to UK revival, but it's labour intensive. What are the present rules for it recruiting overseas workers?
I think what's interesting about the construction sector as an example is it's one of those sectors that probably hasn't really needed to engage with immigration rules very much up to now. Historically, we've taken a lot of our overseas talent in that area from mainland Europe, and there will have been an awful lot of those people that required no regulation whatsoever, depending on which nation they were a member of. For those that did, then will probably be people watching that are familiar with the old sort of work permit scheme, where there was a registration scheme, if you like, for employers and for employees alike. But it was very straightforward, very light touch, really. It was very much the idea of registration and that's it. It didn't really require specific approval in the way that the immigration rules do. So for that reason, it's not that common that you will find construction organisations that are very heavily involved with immigration rules. It might be that they potentially have got sponsored workers, but they might be quite high up in the company and sort of looking at that management level, but perhaps not on the sort of the labourer level. And that will be what will be interesting, I think, and challenging for this sector as the post-Brexit changes take effect, because now all of a sudden it really will be ground level that these rules are applicable, and it will be very, very different to what's come before.
Most big infrastructure contracts are government funded, and we've seen a lot announced just recently. But the procurement officers within those contracts say they will police the immigration laws so that they are not flouted. What should a business do to be truly compliant and ready, prepared for an inspection?
A lot of this probably links back to how the sponsor guidance is really presented. There is this idea that if you have a license, you are getting the benefit from sponsorship, so you have responsibility for sponsorship, for making sure that individuals who are sponsored are compliant. And that duty that places on an employer cannot really be overstated. The employer needs to be able to show that they have very, very robust HR practices, so that at any given day, if that employee is due to be working, if the Home Office arrived, the individual employer would be able to say that person is there doing this job at the moment. They would always need to know where they were and what they were doing. And so there are really specific requirements about things like absence reporting, holiday reporting, keeping up to date with your employees' addresses at home, all of those kinds of things. But that then sort of goes hand in hand with the crossover with employment law, things to do with right to work checks and legal status for workers. And non-compliance in one area can sort of be an indicator that there might be a problem in another. So it's really important for employers, if they're going to be engaging now with these kinds of contracts and going for these sorts of tenders, that they're familiar with what these duties are on them as a sponsor moving forward, because that's what they'll need. They'll need that sponsor license to continue to have these migrant workers after Brexit. So they need to be able to show, yeah, we understand what those duties are. We understand the measures that need to be in place in order to meet those duties. And here are examples of our HR processes. Here are the written processes. So you can see, if something goes wrong, this is how we'll identify it, and this is how we will let you know that.
Yeah, ESG, or environmental, social and corporate governance, is the in thing at the moment as far as construction is concerned. So do construction companies have a responsibility of ensuring that their supply chain is not flouting the immigration rules? And if they do, how can they check upon them?
It's a really interesting question, because it's sort of asking the question of where does somebody's duty stop? From a sponsorship point of view, I would say it's probably quite a straightforward answer. The connections that the Home Office are looking at for sponsorship is the employer-employee relationship. And beyond that, there is not a duty that's on a sponsor to do something additional. That said, I think that employers would need to be very careful with whom they are associating, because being associated with a company or with an organisation that is suddenly discovered to not be complying with the rules can be very damaging to reputation. I mean, we've seen this a lot in sort of a slightly different context, but where a company is suddenly fined for having illegal workers working with them, that can attach a bit of a stigma that really can stick and can actually start to impact on somebody's business. And you can see the potential for that to flow down a supply chain. So, if you've got somebody that's really sort of heading up one of these initiatives, but then all of a sudden one of their suppliers is demonstrated as not complying with these new rules, which are very politically sensitive, then that bad will can flow upstream, unfortunately. So I think people do need to take care, but in terms of the actual measures that they can take to ensure that their supply team are compliant, there isn't a huge amount, I don't think, legally that people are able to do. It's really just about, I think, communication and making sure that they feel comfortable that people have got the right level of understanding of the requirements, which of course an employer can only have if they have that understanding themselves.
I think also important is people with expertise and skill like you posing the questions to those companies who may think, well, I've never had to think about that, and perhaps they need to do so. So what are the top 3 or 4 mistakes that businesses make about their thinking on the application of the new rules?
I think probably the first mistake is thinking that it won't affect me, because it probably will. I think particularly, if an employer has to date not really needed to engage, it will probably feel quite counterintuitive to suddenly think, well, I thought that we were supposed to be making things easier. Britain is open for business, and now why will it be more difficult for me to be able to get the labour that I've always needed, and there's never been any problem with that? And I have a lot of sympathy with that viewpoint, but unfortunately it's not the case. So first mistake I think is just not engaging at all. After that, I think probably assuming that it will be more straightforward than it is, particularly for those employers who are probably quite well established and maybe do have a knowledge and a memory of that old work permit straightforward scheme. It doesn't really work in the same way. And so assuming that, oh, well, it's fine, I didn't really need to do anything before, I'm sure I won't need to do anything now, is not the case either. There is a formal process to go through for sponsor licensing, and there will be steps that need to be taken for every person to be sponsored. So it's really important, I think, that employers engage right now to make sure that they understand what they're going to need to do and make sure that they have the processes in place to do it. And then I think probably the other mistake is there's a lot of focus obviously on what's going to change, but employers are not really serving themselves very well if they don't focus on the employees that they already have as well. They need to make sure that they understand, will anybody be affected that I am currently employing, and will I need to be doing anything different? And those changes are probably smaller, and they probably won't take effect as quickly. But again, this is all about planning. This is all about making sure that things continue to move. And so what employers don't want to do is get everything sorted with this sort of end of the year deadline, and then all of a sudden reach June and say, oh, hang on, I needed to make sure that now I've got to sort of look at my existing EU workforce. I didn't realize that was coming. So it's about making sure that really they've got the full picture.
Wow, yeah. So how at Latitude Law can you go about helping, let's stick with construction, a construction company be and show its compliance?
I think with construction, there's an awful lot that they need to think about with planning. Construction is a really interesting industry for this, because it's one of those industries where it's not that they're excluded from the new rules in the way that, say, domestic care is. And you'll see a lot in the press at the moment about how domestic care will not be covered by these new rules. That isn't the case with construction. An awful lot of those jobs in the sector will probably fall under these new rules, but not all. And I think that makes it very difficult for an employer in terms of working out, well, exactly how is this going to affect me? Things like road construction, rail construction, for example, are 2 really good examples where there's a lot of kind of roles that are and roles that aren't. Scaffolders aren't, crane drivers aren't, in theory, covered by these new rules. So we can assist an employer in working out, where is this going to bite? where is this going to bite worst, and what measures can we put in place to make sure that for the roles where this is possible and where we will need this in order to be able to keep moving, get those measures in place now so there is a smooth transition. I think that's absolutely crucial. And construction is a perfect example of that. When there's a project that needs to be delivered on time, a 4-week lag in the middle where you wait for labour to arrive can be absolutely catastrophic. So it's about making sure that those measures are all in place in good time to keep things moving to schedule.
Shara Pledger, Latitude Law, I'm going to be very cheeky here and get a commitment out of you. Can we come back and talk to you again?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.